What's going on, guys? Tails86 here with Weekly Review, and today we're going to be doing the History of Nintendo Part 3, and we're going to show off the Game Boy system itself. We're going to talk about all the old Game Boys, including the Game Boy Pocket, the Color, and the Game Boy Advance, leading all the way up to the SP and the Game Boy Micro. So I hope you guys are going to enjoy this because it's going to be a blast from the past. It's actually pretty cool if you're able to find one of these still that's actually still working, but then again, they're pretty indestructible. This was the Game Boy Pocket. Now, of course, I do not own the original Game Boy itself, but this one is just as good as the original Game Boy. Now, the thing that was so different between this one and the original Game Boy was the Game Boy Pocket was about 33% thinner. Excuse me if my math was wrong about that, but it is much thinner. It used lesser batteries, using AAA batteries instead of AA's like the original Game Boy used. And supposedly the screen was supposed to be a little bit brighter, they said. It made it so you could actually go ahead and change, excuse me, you could actually change the darkness and the lightness to the system's game that you were playing. It's like, so you can see it's real dark. You could change it, have it real bright, or you can have it real dark. Now that was another thing that was actually cool. So if you didn't want it real dark and if you wanted it real light, you could change it to however you wanted. And it was just a really cool system because, well, I wouldn't really call it a system. I would actually call it more of a handheld more than a system, but you get what I mean. But it was just really cool that you could be able to take the games on the go, and some of them were just as epic as the actual system games. I mean, like, you had actual Mario titles like Super Mario Land 2. You had Kirby's Dream Land. You even had some puzzle games of Tetris. You even had some games that are very hard to find nowadays. Well, not really hard to find, but brand new, yes. Which was the Game & Watch games that were made a long time ago, back on the very first system that Nintendo made, which was the Game & Watch handheld. Now, of course, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of other games that all the way lead up to the Game Boy Advance. But we're not going to talk about the Game Boy Advance just yet. We're going to stick strictly to the Game Boy Pocket and the Game Boy Color. Now, one of the other cool things about this was, like I said, it made it so you could be able to put it straight in your pocket. It was slimmer, it was sleeker, and you could actually use an extension cable, if you see it right there, to be able to hook up. If you had Pokemon games or anything like that, you could actually play Pokemon, and you could trade them if you had the extension cable to be able to trade your Pokemon when you had the original versions of Pokemon Black, Pokemon Blue, and Pokemon Red. Now, of course, later on, around that time, Nintendo was creating a new Game Boy, which we went ahead and found out later was the very first color handheld from Nintendo, which was the Game Boy Color. Now, this one came in a variety of different colors. I have the yellow sunny one. And they also had a lot of special promotional Game Boys, like the Pikachu Game Boy, and so on and so forth. But if you owned any original Game Boy game, you could still play it, and it would go ahead and bring it into color. Now, like, we have Metal Gear Solid in there right now, which plays in full color, and is a very great game. If you haven't picked it up, you definitely need to. But one of the other cool things about it was it still went ahead and kept the original buttons and everything. They switched a lot from the Pocket to the Game Boy Color. It was a little bit fatter, of course, because it had to be able to hold full color, and it also went back to using AA batteries, and it also had the extension, but it also had it so if you were playing Pokemon Gold or Silver, you could actually use this little wireless, I forgot what they called this, but it made it so, like, if you wanted to use a mystery gift with a friend, you could actually go ahead and use it wirelessly. And then it also still had the extension cables to be able to use if you wanted to trade Pokemon with wired controls. But another cool thing about that was, like I said, was you could be able to take all your games that you had from the original Game Boy and put them on color, including even Wario Land and certain games that weren't able to actually have color at the time. Now, otherwise, after this came the granddaddy of them all. And now it's time to go ahead and show off the beast of all, the Game Boys. This was the Game Boy Advance, also known as the Game Boy Advance SP. Now there were two different versions of the Game Boy Advance. There was the Advance one with no light for the brightness, and then there was the SP that made it so you could not only fold the system and be able to carry it around even smaller than the original Game Boy Pocket, but you could just be able to flip the system open basically like a little mini laptop, and you could be able to play all your games in pure bright color. Now, one of the really cool things about this was it was compatible with every Game Boy game that ever came out, from Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, everything. And it was also region free, so if there were any Game Boy games at all that you wanted that were only available in Japan, you could be able to play these on it, and it would be able to play them whenever you wanted. Now, one of the things that I like so much about this is I love the D-pad that they used for the Game Boy Advance SP and the original Advance, because not only was it even easier to push down on it, it didn't make as much of a clicking sound as a lot of their other ones did, like on the Pocket, and same thing for the Game Boy Color. Didn't make the buttons as clicky for some reason to me, and I'm glad that they did that. But not only that, but they made it so you could be able to use the charger that it came with, so you could also use an extension if you wanted to be able to trade Pokemon or anything that you wanted to wired still. But you could also be able to play, like I said, all of your original Game Boy games, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. So there was a lot of really cool versions of this that came out. Like there was another Pikachu version of this that came out. They had an actual NES anniversary for when this came out. They actually had one that was basically looking like the original Nintendo itself right there, basically in a smaller form. But I really like this Game Boy more than any of the other Game Boys, not only because you didn't have to use batteries at all. You were able to charge it, and you could be able to play any Game Boy game in the entire library of Game Boy history. So, guys, I really hope that you went ahead and enjoyed this small little blast from the past of the original Game Boy systems, handhelds, and I'm hoping that y'all are going to be looking forward to my next video sometime before the end of March. I will be actually having another history of Nintendo video about the Nintendo Wii. And again, also sorry about it being a little delayed. I've been busy with a lot of other videos and other stuff. But anyway, there are more of these coming, and I'm hoping that y'all are going to enjoy the next one, which will be on the Nintendo Wii. And then I will be showing off on the last one, on part 5, showing off the Nintendo DS, the DS Lite, and the DSi. So guys, thank you very much for watching. This has been Weekly Review. Take care. Later.